It was the third straight day of sleet and black ice when Thomas Pike slipped on the cabin steps and split his forearm open on the corner of his axe block. No one blamed him for crying out. He was 64, half-blind, stubborn as a Missouri mule, and had already lost 2 toes that winter to the cold. But when he hollered for his boy to fetch more wood, and the boy came back shaking and empty-handed because every single log was frozen into the ground and slicked in a coat of ice, well, that's when Pike cursed loud enough to make the Lord wince. Up the hill, not 50 yards away, smoke puffed calmly from the stovepipe of a smaller cabin. No ice-laced boards on the porch, no footprints sunk too deep, no frozen tools jutting out of stiff snow like forgotten tombstones. And no one knew how she did it. Just weeks before, that same woman, Rachel McKeen, the widow from the Blue Bend Road, had been the joke of the whole settlement. A woodshed. She built a damned woodshed. Not a barn, not a loft, not a pantry for smoked meats. She put her sweat and effort, with no man and only a mule, into raising a square shed with a slanted roof, deep eaves, and what some said was overkill bracing. A fine little coffin for kindling, folks joked. Looks like she wants her firewood to have its own funeral. Even her nearest neighbor, old Elias Dobbs, told her plainly, "Miss McKeen, you don't need a whole shack just for firewood. Stack it by the cabin wall like everyone else. Snow's gonna fall either way." She just smiled, not with spite and not with nerves. A small, knowing smile, like she'd already lived through the winter no one else saw coming. No one knew what Rachel had seen, what she'd survived before this place. But when that first real storm dropped 5 feet of snow on the pass in one night, and the wind snapped the makeshift sheds to splinters, her firewood stood dry and proud, as dry as the day she split it. And that's when the whispers started changing tune. But it hadn't always been whispers. When she first arrived, dragging behind a wheeled sledge with a sleeping child wrapped tight in its bedroll, and another too young to even walk, most assumed she'd be begging for help before the leaves turned. She wore no ring. Her mule was half-starved. Her boys didn't speak, and she had nothing more than a claim, a broken cart, and enough nails to make a poor man's coffin. Yet by autumn's end, she had a cabin, not a fine one, but square, sturdy. And next to it, before a stove had even gone into the house, she laid the first beams for that woodshed. "Cabin's not even chinked yet," Dobbs muttered to his wife when he saw her hauling old timbers. "And she's out there building a damned box for twigs." Others laughed too. Old-timers who'd seen 5 winters, even 10, men who knew how to lay a stone footing, and women who could gut a mule deer before lunch. But none of them had ever wasted time building a home for firewood, and certainly not like she did. Rachel dug down, not deep, but deeper than any man would for something non-essential. Her foundation stones were dry set, her walls slanted inward slightly, not for looks, but for the way they cut the wind. She ran her shingles tight and overlapped them like armor scales, and when the rains came in late October, her boys were already stacking logs inside. Neat as a library. No one helped her, no one offered, but everyone watched. One evening, Dobbs himself walked over under pretense of lending her a draw knife, but really to peek inside. "Looks dark in there," he said, squinting past her shoulder. "Won't mold grow?" She just shrugged. "Logs don't need sun, they need air. Roof keeps them dry, and the vents keep 'em breathing." He grunted like he didn't hear, but he went home slower than usual, chewing his cheek. By Christmas, most of the cabins around hers had damp logs stacked high along their walls, crusted in sleet. Tarps blew loose, ice built up where the wood met the earth. And Rachel, who nobody had seen buy new firewood since mid-fall, still had smoke in her chimney day and night. Her boys looked warm too. That rattled some. Most assumed she'd brought more than she let on, maybe had a hidden pile somewhere, or traded favors for seasoned wood. Some even whispered that she was burning furniture, or had a secret man slipping her supplies. The truth was simpler and much harder to swallow, because come mid-January, when Pike's fire died and he found his logs locked in a crust of ice so solid he had to chip at them with a hatchet just to free one, he sent his boy up the hill. He wouldn't admit it later, swore on his rifle he never asked. But everyone saw the boy knock on Rachel McKeen's door with a scarf wrapped too high to hide his red cheeks, and saw him leave a few minutes later with 3 dry logs hugged tight to his chest. The next morning, Dobbs's wife took a pie-up, and by the end of that week, half the settlement had made excuses to drop by, just to check in, and always left with an armful of Rachel's wood. She didn't ask for anything in return, not then, not a penny, not a favor. She kept her mouth closed, her boys fed, and her stove lit. But she watched how the same men who'd mocked her now lowered their heads when they asked if they could just borrow a few sticks, watched how their wives brought jam or leftover stew, offering too many thanks. She didn't gloat, she didn't need to, because by now, folks knew. that useless woodshed of hers. It was the smartest thing anyone had built that year, and it wasn't just keeping her boys warm, it was quietly saving half the valley. But not everyone liked that. One man in particular thought the attention on her was dangerous. His name was Cormick, a widower himself, and a man used to being the center of any praise that passed through the valley. He had the biggest cabin, the best-tended garden, and a booming voice that filled the chapel even when he wasn't the one preaching, and he didn't like being outshone. So when Rachel's wood kept burning and his didn't, and when his new stack turned to wet mush despite his oiled tarps, he stopped by, not to ask, but to accuse. "You done something," he said, standing stiff at her porch. "Ain't natural how your logs stay dry while the rest of us fight mold." She looked him dead in the eyes. "Built a shed, that's all," he sniffed. "Must have been more. What did you line the walls with? Magic?" Her younger boy, barely 6, peeked out from behind her skirts. She laid a hand on his head and didn't flinch. "No magic, Mr. Cormick. Just foresight." That word didn't sit well with him. He muttered something about uppity women and stomped off. But that night he tried to build his own shed, and what happened after that would twist the valley's view of Rachel McKeen for good, because his shed didn't survive the storm that came 3 nights later. And he blamed her for that too. Not the weather, not his inexperience, her. And when people started whispering again, this time not with mockery but suspicion, Rachel didn't close her door. She opened it wider, which in turn would bring something worse than snow to her doorstep. And she'd need more than dry firewood to survive it. The second storm came harder. It swept in from the northwest, like a black curtain dragging ice behind it, dropping the air from bitter to deadly in a single evening. Roofs cracked. A wagon axle snapped in the cold, bursting like dry bone. No one dared go out after sundown unless they wanted frostbite for breakfast. Doors were barred, blankets doubled, stoves filled fast, except most folks had run out of wood, or at least usable wood. The same logs they'd stacked so high and proud against their cabin walls now steamed and hissed like green willow when tossed on the coals. Some burned only on one side, the rest spitting water as if baptized. Kindling wouldn't catch. Bark froze fast enough to dull blades. And in the dark corners of each home, children began to shiver, and women began to cry, not out of weakness, but out of helplessness. Because when a storm won't end and your fire won't burn, it's no longer a matter of comfort, it's survival. And survival in that valley suddenly meant one name: Rachel McKeen. Her shed stood as it had before, eaves now iced at the tips but solid, logs inside dry as ever, not because of some mystery, but because the air vents she'd built high into each gable let moisture escape, because the floor slatted with narrow gaps allowed wind to roll beneath, because she'd taken the time to stack each round cut with a hand's width of space between, because she'd known what most hadn't wanted to believe: snow didn't ruin firewood, time did. Time and carelessness. But now, no one was laughing, they were begging. By the 5th day of the storm, 7 families had come to her door. Not all asked nicely. One man, Carter from the ridge, near kicked it in until Rachel opened it before he could. His wife was behind him with a red-faced child wrapped in fur, looking small and quiet. Carter asked with a clenched jaw. But Rachel saw the truth in his shoulders. He wasn't a proud man anymore, just scared. She handed them an armful and said nothing about it. The next came in tears. Mrs. Lockley, her husband, had frozen fingers from splitting iced logs with bare hands. They'd taken to sleeping 3 to a bed and putting the last of their biscuits inside their pillowcases to keep them from freezing solid. Rachel gave her wood too, but by the 8th visitor she realized something chilling. Her shed wasn't bottomless. She had planned well, for herself, for her 2 boys, even for a few weeks extra in case of injury or emergency, but not for half a settlement, not for so many knocks on her door in so short a span, and certainly not for the storm to trap them like this. Her boys knew too. Ben, the older one, counted stacks behind her when she thought he was asleep. He didn't ask, but she saw it in the way he looked at her hands when she loaded wood into their stove. And the younger one, Eli, clung a little tighter each time someone left with an armful. "We're gonna be okay," she told them both, "but we gotta be smart." And smart meant boundaries. So the next day, she did something most hadn't seen her do. She stepped outside, not to chop, not to haul, but to speak. She went to the chapel. It was the only place still open, not for services. Those had stopped when Reverend Dale's breath turned to frost in mid-sermon, but for warmth. A dozen families had taken to sleeping in the pews, clustered around the one stove left with real heat, a Franklin built with brick backing, burning the last of Pike's cellar stock. Rachel entered without drama. No coat, just her shawl pulled tight, her hair wrapped, boots dry. She didn't wait for silence. "I've given what I could," she said loud enough for the room to still. "I've shared what I had, and I'll keep sharing, but not with silence." A few heads turned. Some nodded. Some didn't like the tone. "I built that shed because I knew this would come," she went on. "Not this exact storm, but something like it, because I'd lived through it before. My boys and I, we lost someone once, just like some of you are losing warmth now. I swore I'd never be unready again." Someone in the back grunted. "What are you asking then?" It was a woman's voice, not unfriendly, just tired. "You want us to pay?" Rachel shook her head. "I want you to help each other. I want you to learn what I did. And I want someone to help me build more." That caught them off guard. "More sheds?" Carter asked. "Yes," she said, "but smaller, fast ones. Anything with a roof and air and a little lift off the ground. If we start now, between storms, we can save what's left of your wood, and I'll share what I've got, but only if you pitch in." Thad Cormick stood then. He looked colder than most, his nose pinked from wind, gloves worn through at the palms. His voice came slow like it hurt to speak. "You giving conditions now, Widow McKeen?" She didn't blink. "I'm offering a plan. You saying we earned this cold, that it's our fault?" "No, I'm saying you ignored warnings." He flared at that. "And you think you're better than us?" Rachel looked him in the eye. "No, just ready." The chapel went still again, tighter, like a wire pulled taut. And that's when the door slammed open behind her. It was young Aaron Dobbs, Elias's grandson, panting hard, snow covering his hat like cake sugar. "They found a man," he gasped. "Out near the frozen creek." Silence broke like glass. "Who?" someone asked. "Mr. Lockley," the boy said, eyes wide. His fingers went black. "Tried to find dry wood in the storm. He's alive, but barely." Rachel felt her stomach lurch. She had given them some logs days ago, but not enough. Not for what they were facing now. No one had expected it to stretch this long. "I'll come," she said. "No," the boy said quickly. "You shouldn't." "Why?" he hesitated. "Because they're blaming you." The air dropped colder than the wind outside. "What?" Rachel said slowly. "Mr. Cormick. He said if you hadn't hoarded, if you'd just given more sooner, Mr. Lockley wouldn't have gone out." Cormick shifted in the back, but didn't deny it. Rachel's heart went hard in her chest, not from fear, from rage. "I saved your families," she said, stepping forward. "And now you turn?" Some heads lowered, some turned away. Cormick sneered. "A woman who builds a palace for firewood don't think like the rest of us. She thinks she's above us." "No," she said, voice low. "I just think past the next week." And without waiting for another word, she stepped into the storm. She didn't wait to see who followed. She didn't care. The wind knifed sideways across her face, and her boots vanished in knee-deep snow within seconds. But she walked fast, faster than she'd moved in months. Not out of panic, but fury. She had saved them, again and again, and still they looked for someone to blame. She reached her shed. She opened it. She didn't count the stacks this time. She pulled out 3 full armloads and set them on a sled she used for kindling. Then she headed for the Lockley place. It took nearly 40 minutes to reach it. The wind cut her eyes raw. Her hands bled through her mitts. But when she got there, she saw the shape of him on the porch. Lockley himself, frozen half stiff with blankets wrapped around him, lips cracked and blue. He mumbled something when she crouched near. She lifted his head and fed him water from the tin she'd warmed under her shawl. She put 2 logs under his frozen boots, and she laid the rest against the cabin wall. Inside, his wife cried. Rachel lit a fire and said nothing. Not that night, not for a while. But the next morning, when word spread that Lockley was breathing again, talking even, something shifted. Dobbs came down with his grandson, not to ask for wood, to help split some. Then Carter arrived with a cart of rotted planks, asking if they'd do for a quick lean-to. And by afternoon, the front of Rachel's shed was ringed with men and women, sawing, hammering, nailing windbreaks together out of anything they had. They stopped blaming her. They started following her, except one. Cormick didn't help. He didn't show up, and no one saw him for 3 days. When they did, what they found in his cabin would change everything, and it would make Rachel wish she'd never built that shed at all. When Thad Cormick's door was finally forced open, the men who went inside would swear, years later, that the cold in there was not just from the air. It felt older than winter. It felt like guilt. It was Elias Dobbs who led the group. 3 days into the silence. Snow had finally let up, clouds thinning just enough to show the outline of pines against the hills again. Rachel's firewood was nearly gone, less than 2 stacks now. But every family who'd helped build sheds had dry piles of their own. Men were sharing tools, not insults. Carter had even fixed Rachel's sled runner without being asked. Cormick, though, hadn't been seen since the chapel argument. Dobbs knocked first, polite as he could, voice firm but unaccusing. When no answer came, he tried again. Nothing but wind. Then came Carter, a crowbar in hand, followed by Mrs. Lockley's oldest son with a lantern. It took 2 good heaves to snap the ice binding the door shut, and what they found inside made everyone go still. Cormick was there, sitting at his table, hands wrapped tight around a stoneware mug. His eyes open but unfocused, his breath slow and shallow. Around him, nothing but ash, not firewood ash, burnt furniture, his own table legs, his wife's old rocking chair. The framed photo that used to hang over his hearth was in the stove, half charred and crumpled in the corner. There was no wood left, no food either. He had burned everything but the walls around him. Dobbs stepped in slowly. "Thad," he said. "You hear me?" Cormick didn't move. Then he whispered, just one phrase, brittle and small. "She stole it." Dobbs leaned closer. "Who?" Cormick didn't blink. "The widow. She stole it all. This whole winter should have been mine." The men exchanged glances. "He's gone fevered," Carter muttered. "No," Mrs. Lockley's boy said. "He's angry, that's all." But it was more than anger. They left him wrapped in blankets, hands by the stove, and someone fetched Rachel, not because she could fix him, but because, truthfully, no one else knew what to do. When she entered that cabin, the air shifted. It smelled like scorched varnish and old sorrow. She didn't flinch. She looked at Cormick, hollow and frozen inside. Then she looked at what was left of his pride. Cracked floorboards where chairs had once stood, smoke-stained walls, a man's legacy, burned to keep himself alive a few more nights. Rachel didn't speak at first, just knelt, took his hand gently in hers, and set a folded square of bark paper into his palm. On it, a list. 4 logs at sunrise, she said. 2 more at dusk. I'll bring 'em, but only if you come out and help the others stack theirs. Cormick didn't reply. But that night, when Dobbs passed the widow's shed, he saw a figure out back, shadowed, slow, but moving. Cormick, restacking Carter's piles to keep airflow between, not speaking, not asking forgiveness, but working. The next days blurred together in a rhythm no one had known before. Cabins stopped being islands. People walked between them, shared their tricks, traded tips, keep kindling in flour sacks to keep moisture out, bury coals in ash at night to save heat, shared axes, wrapped handles in dry rags to keep fingers from sticking to steel, and one by one, makeshift sheds began to appear across the valley. Some were laughable, slapped together with barrel staves and shipping crates. One was nothing more than a canvas tarp over a fence corner with hay bales stacked as walls. But they worked, kept the logs lifted, gave the wind something to bounce off. Rachel's idea, once mocked, had become gospel, not just because of the wood, but because of what it symbolized. She'd built something when she had nothing, and now even those with more were learning from her. She still had little left, just a handful of logs. But what she had brought her something more lasting, respect, even admiration. But that didn't mean she trusted it. Admiration from a crowd is like smoke in the wind, and Rachel had known crowds before. They shift fast. One bad fire, one wrong word, and the wind turns. So when her youngest Eli got sick, she didn't ask for help, not right away. She bundled him in quilts, kept the stove burning, fed him warm broth from dried roots and salt meat. He coughed hard, his breath like a bellows in a broken forge, rattling and thin. Ben watched him, sat close, didn't speak much but stayed near. At 12, he was already more man than boy. His face had gone long in the cheekbones, and his hands blistered from splitting logs. He tried not to let her see him cry when Eli's fever climbed. But one morning, she found him standing outside the chapel, waiting for Dobbs. "Please," he said, "my brother's real bad. Mama won't say it, but she's scared." Dobbs didn't hesitate. He told Carter. Carter told Mrs. Lockley. Within hours, half the settlement had taken it on themselves to help. Pike's boy brought herbs. Dobbs's wife arrived with heated bricks for Eli's feet. Carter stood outside the cabin most of the night, splitting logs from what he called his repayment pile. Rachel didn't cry. She thanked each person, voice even. But that night, when Ben finally slept beside Eli and the fire crackled low, she sat by the shed alone and whispered one sentence into the frozen dark. "I didn't think they'd come." She didn't mean God, she meant them, and for the first time in years, she felt something she'd forgotten: safety. The spring didn't come with flowers. It came with melt, with mud, with wet boots and timber sliding down hillsides. But it came, and when it did, something strange happened. No one left. Usually, after a hard winter, at least 2 or 3 families would pack and vanish, head south, say the land was cursed. But that year, no one moved. They rebuilt together. And in late March, when the ground finally showed stone and root again, a group of women and children gathered outside Rachel's cabin. They brought wood, clean cut, dry, split with care. "We figured you might need some back," Mrs. Lockley said. Rachel looked down at the bundles. "Didn't expect that," she murmured. "Well," Carter said, coming up behind them. "We didn't expect you to save half our children either, but here we are." She smiled then, not the knowing smile from autumn, a different one, something softer, something earned. That summer, Rachel's shed became more than a shed. It became the model. Men came to her, not just for advice, but to borrow her blueprints, sketched on old cloth scraps with charcoal lines, showing how to angle vents, which way to pitch a roof. She hosted gatherings under its eaves, showing young boys how to tell dry wood from green by smell alone. She taught the girls how to stack it, how to leave air between, how to read which logs would light fastest in a pinch. Cormick even showed up once, wordless, and handed her a set of cedar boards. "Figured you could use them for a second shed," he said. She didn't answer, just nodded and accepted. By fall, there were 15 sheds in the valley, and no one mocked them. When travelers came through and saw them, neat wooden lean-tos, some with stone footings, some wrapped in pitchcloth, they asked if the valley had always been this smart. Dobbs just chuckled. "We had a teacher," he'd say. "She built yours too?" "Nope. Just gave us the idea. The rest, we did that ourselves." Rachel didn't attend the harvest dance that year. She stayed home with her boys, made hot cider, sat under the stars. But that night, one of the valley girls knocked on her door with a pie and a folded cloth. Inside it, a carving knife, handle engraved with her initials. "We all pitched in," the girl said shyly, "even Cormick." Rachel took the gift gently, ran her thumb across the handle. The weight was just right. "Thank you," she said. "Next year," the girl added, "we're thinking of naming the new settlement corner after you." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "McKeen's Hollow," the girl said, beaming. "Since that's where your shed still stands?" Rachel shook her head, smiling. "I just built a home for Firewood," she said. "No," the girl replied. "You built a way to survive." The valley remembered its gratitude through the summer. Men who once raised only their own walls now helped the widow patch her roof before monsoon season. The Carter boys dug a proper drainage channel behind her shed. Even old Pike, who'd once cursed the sky itself when his logs froze solid, now spent mornings walking the ridge with Ben, teaching him how to spot dead wood versus rot. The settlement had changed, not because someone passed a rule, but because someone had survived and others had watched. Still, Rachel didn't fool herself. Summer kindness didn't always mean winter loyalty, so when early snows fell again, weeks ahead of the season, she took no chances. Her second shed was already half full. Not just wood, but kindling baskets, rope-tied bundles of pine cones, fat lighter from the base of old stumps. She even carved small plaques for each stack, labels noting the dryness, the age, the kind of tree. She let the neighbors laugh again, if they dared. But this time they didn't. They asked questions instead, measured her spacing, took notes. And when a family from across the pass arrived, ragged, frost-bit, half-starved after their ox threw a wheel axle mid-descent, it was Rachel's fire that warmed them first. Word of her shed had traveled, not by her doing, but from the mouths of those she'd helped. They called her the Firewoman, some said. The Widow of Flame, others whispered. Pike scoffed at the names. "She's just a mother who doesn't like her boys to freeze," he'd tell newcomers. But it was more than that. Rachel was now a symbol of foresight, of quiet strength, of the way a woman could change a whole valley with nothing more than timber, stone, and stubbornness. But symbols don't come without cost. And that winter, the cost came in the form of smoke. It was late November when the first fire hit. Not a hearth, not a chimney gone wrong. A shed, Carter's second shed to be exact, the one built near his back fence line, where he stored a quarter of his season's dry wood. He'd stacked it right, braced it, built it by Rachel's drawing, but it burned, fast, too fast. By the time he and his sons saw the glow through the dark, the sky was already pulsing orange, and the shed was howling with flame. By morning there was nothing left but ash and twisted nails. "No lightning," Carter said, dazed. "No sparks. And we hadn't lit the stove since midday." Dobbs came to inspect. So did Rachel. They circled the ruin in silence. The pattern of the burn, the way the fire started low, the faint traces of boot heel in the snow, melted uneven near the rear. "It wasn't an accident," Rachel said flatly. Pike frowned. "You mean someone?" She nodded. "I mean someone set it." The idea of sabotage, of arson, hit the valley like a fever. They hadn't seen real crime in years. A theft here, a quarrel there, but not malice, not destruction. The fire forced every family to look closer at their own sheds. Some reinforced their walls with stone, others tied buckets of water nearby. Pike dug a firebreak around his. Rachel watched it all quietly. She said little, but at night she started sleeping with her boots near the door and a hammer by her stove. And when she walked her property, she did it with eyes sharp, scanning not just the trees, but the prints in the snow. 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time, It was Dobbs's old lean-to, his first shed, the one he'd kept mostly for kindling now since the second was larger. It burned slower, the fire didn't spread. He caught it in time, but again, no reason, no spark, no flue nearby, just charred footprints in the snow leading off into the woods. Rachel examined them herself, narrow, deep, dragging slightly on the right heel. She made no accusation, not yet, but that night she took Ben aside. "I want you to do something for me," she said quietly. "You know the dry patch between our back trail and the pine grove?" He nodded. "I want you to bury something there, something soaked in turpentine. Leave it and watch." Ben didn't question her. The next night he saw movement, a figure, thin and bundled, crouched near the pines, flint in hand, the scent of oil in the air. He didn't confront them. He ran back, woke his mother. But by the time they returned, the patch was already burning. Ben tried to douse it, snow shoveling with his arms. Rachel grabbed wet sacks. They saved the trees, but not before they both saw it, a coat, charred on one side, dropped in the rush. Rachel picked it up, held it to the lantern, and her breath caught. It was Cormick's. They waited 2 days before going to his cabin. He didn't deny it, just sat there, wheezing by his fire, eyes hollow. "She built a shrine," he said, "and all of you knelt." Dobbs stared hard. "You tried to burn our firewood." "She stole my name," Cormick whispered. "This valley used to listen to me. I was the man folks came to. Now they bow to a woman with sheds." Rachel didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "You could have asked for help." He laughed once, a dry, empty sound. "I did, and she made me work for it, made me sweat like a dog." "You're alive," Carter growled. "That's more than some." "But not enough," Cormick spat. "Not enough when I had to take her hand in front of everyone." His shame had curdled into hate. Rachel finally stepped forward. "You're leaving," she said. He blinked. "You'll pack and go by end of week. Take what wood you've got, no more. If I see you near another shed, I'll put word out to the sheriff in Marlow." "You don't run this valley," he snarled, but no one defended him. Not Pike, not Dobbs, not the Carter boys. "I don't," she said, "but they do. And they've already chosen." Cormick left 3 days later. His cart limped down the trail, one wheel wrapped in rope to keep it from squealing. He said nothing as he passed Rachel's cabin, didn't look back, just vanished into the snow, leaving only half tracks behind. The valley exhaled, no one cheered, but the quiet that returned had weight to it, like ice melting from a roof. That spring, Rachel built a third shed, not because she needed it, because the valley did. This one wasn't just for firewood, it was for teaching. She etched diagrams into its wall beams, marked lines with charcoal, showing airflow, slope, ideal stacking height. Children came to learn, even those from other valleys. By summer's end, 5 new families had moved in. The settlement doubled. They brought stories, and supplies, and skills, but also questions. They asked about the winter, about the firewoman, and every time someone told them, she just built a home for firewood. But they always added, and it saved us all. The third shed stood taller than the others, not out of pride, but necessity. The beams were thicker, the roof higher, the front open like a stall, and the walls bore permanent inkwork from the Carter boys, diagrams, sketches, even seasonal wood stacking schedules. Rachel hadn't asked them to do it. They'd just shown up one morning with cedar planks and said, "We figured it's time folks stopped asking you and just started learning." She'd said nothing, but she'd left an apple pie cooling on her porch that afternoon, and everyone knew what it meant. Through the summer and into the next fall, the shed became something new, a place people visited, even when they didn't need to. When a child came of age, they spent a day helping Rachel split kindling. When a new family moved in, the widow's third shed was one of the first stops. She showed them how to sort damp from dry, how to split with the grain, how to stack with gaps and care. And always, she told them one thing. This isn't just about wood, it's about being ready. Some nodded, not understanding. Others took it to heart. The settlement changed because of that phrase. Come September, nearly every household had some form of a shed, some with stone floors, some braced with leftover wagon beams, others lined with canvas and pitch. But all followed the same spirit, a roof, a dry place, a step ahead of the storm. Even the Reverend, who'd once said that too much worry was a sign of weak faith, now had a modest shed beside the chapel, and inside it, carved on the back wall, were 5 words burned into the grain. "Rachel knew before we did." That winter came faster than anyone expected. The leaves dropped early. Elk moved downslope before the first frost. Birds vanished from the trees with barely a whisper. And then the snow came, not in flakes but in sheets, blanketing the valley with 3 feet in under a day. Wind clawed at shutters. Frost sealed wells shut. But this time, no one panicked. Sheds stood firm. Fires burned bright. Wood was dry, seasoned, split, and waiting. And as the days grew darker, the only thing that passed between cabins were warm hands, fresh bread, and shared thanks. Rachel stayed quiet. She'd stacked enough to last. She had no need to leave. But it was the children who brought the news. A family down the West Trail, new arrivals, had built too late, stored too wrong. Their wood was damp, their stove guttering, their youngest boy coughing at night. Rachel heard it and didn't hesitate. She loaded her sled, same as she had before. Ben, now taller than her shoulder, came without needing to be told. "You sure?" he asked. "We might need it." "We have enough," she said. And they don't. That trail was narrow and curved, half lost to the wind, but they found the cabin. Rachel knocked twice. The door opened. A man stood there, gaunt, embarrassed. "I didn't want to ask," he murmured. "You didn't," she said. "I came anyway." She set down the wood, stacked it herself, showed them how to keep it dry even inside, then turned to leave. But the man touched her arm. "My father, he used to say sheds were a waste, said real men stacked their wood under the sky." She gave a soft smile. "And did his wood burn, come winter?" He said nothing. "Mine does," she said. "That's all that matters." Weeks passed. No fires, no shortages, no shame, just life, quiet, flickering, warm. And yet, despite the peace, Rachel began to notice something she hadn't felt before, a strange stillness in her own chest. Not a fear, not an illness, just a quiet question. What comes after survival? For years, her life had been built around the next storm, the next threat, the next mistake to outthink. And now, for the first time, she looked around and saw no one needed her. They had learned, they had prepared, she'd passed it on. One evening, Ben returned from the ridge with a bundle of kindling and a face lined in thought. "I saw Pike's place," he said. "He's teaching his grandsons to split rounds now." She nodded. "And Carter?" she asked. "He's building a fourth shed. Says he's going to try to seal the floor with pitch next year." She stirred the pot on the stove. The stew smelled rich, better than years before. "You think they'd be all right?" she said. "If we ever left?" Ben blinked. "Leave? Not now. But maybe someday." He shrugged. "I guess. But this is home." She looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't a boy anymore. His hands were scarred, his voice deeper. He'd survived the same winters she had, and soon he'd have to build something of his own. Not just a shed, but a life. And she knew the moment was coming. She sat by the fire that night, Eli curled in a blanket beside her, Ben sharpening his blade, and watched the shadows dance across the floorboards. The wind howled outside, a sound she used to fear. Now it felt like music. She'd made it, not just through storms, through doubt, through mockery, through hate. She had taken the smallest structure a settler could build, a box for wood, and turned it into a legacy. One day, her sheds would rot, her beams would bend, her diagrams fade, but the lesson would stay. Dry wood saves lives, and so does foresight. Spring came soft that year, late but gentle. When the frost finally broke, the people of the valley gathered near the chapel for what had become an unofficial tradition, the fire blessing. No preacher led it, no formal rites, just a potluck, some shared stories, and the naming of any new sheds. That year, they asked Rachel to speak. She didn't want to. She didn't like being stared at, but she stepped forward anyway. Her boys watched from the side. She cleared her throat once, glanced at the crowd, and said, "I didn't build my shed because I wanted to be different. I built it because I'd seen what happened when I wasn't ready. I didn't do it to impress. I did it to protect. I built it for my boys." She paused. Turns out, that was enough to help others too. A hush followed, then soft clapping. Nothing wild, but respectful, earned. By midsummer, a sign appeared near the road leading into the valley, carved by hand, hung between two posts, painted in black soot and pine resin. It read, "McKeen's Hollow, where the fire stays lit." Rachel didn't cry when she saw it, but Ben swore her eyes shined a little longer than usual that night. Years later, when new travelers asked where the old firewoman had gone, people would point toward the ridge. "She's still up there," they'd say, "still stacking, still teaching." And even if she wasn't home, they'd gesture to the sheds. "To understand her," they'd say, "you don't need to meet her. Just look at what she left us. Dry wood, warm stoves, and a story you can pass down every winter, every time the snow falls, every time someone dares laugh at a woman for building something useless."